The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination, other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media, is strictly prohibited.
Welcome back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. Today, once again, our panel will be answering listener emails, and we have a question from Claudia, who lives in London, England. Claudia asks, so, it looks like the U.S. is moving toward pulling out of NATO. Oh, yeah. Can you give me an idea of what the panel thinks this might look like for the future of NATO? What might this mean for Ukraine? If the U.S. does move out of NATO, will your country become isolated from the rest of the world? It seems obvious Canada and the European Union are looking elsewhere for economic and political partnerships.
Yeah, it's a good question, I guess. Thank you very much for it. NATO is the most impressive military alliance in history, and it has managed to keep the peace more or less in Europe for a very long time now. I worked for a German company and it was based in a place called Böblingen, Germany. And I would go there, 3 or 4 times a year. And if you went to a restaurant or a bar in Böblingen, you were going to see more Americans than you were going to see Germans, because there were 3 military bases in this small place. And I do recall thinking, we are heavily invested in the protection of Europe. How long do we need to do that? Do we need to do it forever? And I would say that if we brought those troops home, and I guess they would be unemployed. It's hard to figure out what we would do with all of them if we didn't need them overseas, why we would have them in bases here in the States. Would there actually be a peace dividend to go with that? And the answer is probably yes. And then the 2 airports that I used to use to get into Böblingen were Frankfurt and Zurich. And both of those airports are amazing places, much nicer than any airport I've ever been to here in the States. And I've been all over. And I thought to myself, they've got great infrastructure there, right? The airport and the rail link together in Frankfurt was an amazing thing. And it was a big mall with hotels and restaurants and all kinds of things. You would get on a train, a high-speed rail, to go from Frankfurt through Mannheim to Stuttgart and then to Böblingen. And there were times where you were on that train and you had to look out the window to know whether you were moving or not, because you were going 120 kilometers, or was something like along the lines of, I guess, 80 miles an hour. And it was so smooth that you couldn't believe that you were actually moving. And if you take Amtrak to go from New York to Baltimore, you might lose fillings, if not teeth, because the ride is so bumpy and our rail service here is awful and people don't like to use it if they don't absolutely have to. And so there's a lot that we could do with the money if there was a peace dividend, right? Trump's idea of what NATO is and how it's funded is completely off the wall. As with so many diagnoses that he has made over the years, he gets it wrong because he seems to think that it's a big pot of money that everybody throws into. Like, if you're with a mixed group of people at a restaurant and you're all eating, and then, the check comes and everybody throws some money down. And in his opinion, somebody's not throwing enough money down and it's everybody but us. But that's not how it works. It's simply a commitment to spend a certain percentage of your GDP, I believe it's 2% of your GDP, on your military, so you are militarily ready to defend yourselves. Yes, Brooke?
Yeah, now apparently Pete Hegseth is saying 2%'s not enough, 3%'s not enough, 4%'s not enough. Now we want 5%.
Right, which is insane. Yeah, thanks. He wants to go up to 5%. Trump has said also that he wants to go up to 5%, which would be, and I forget how many trillions, $7 trillion or $8 trillion. spent on defense for no real reason that anybody could ascertain. But in any event, the reality is that we don't get anything for that, right? The American people are not going to prosper because we're pulling out of NATO, or that if they spent more money doesn't mean we're going to spend less money. As you say, they already want to bump it up more. So I don't see the point in leaving NATO. Yes, Brooke.
Yeah, sorry, it's kind of it to me. It's laughable because J.D. Vance's comment of, well, Russia's not the enemy is within. So if the enemy is within, why does anybody need to spend 2% or 3% or 5% on defense? What are they defending against? If the enemy's from within, they don't need to spend money on military defense. What, are they going to defend against their own people? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, go ahead.
So I'm not, I believe NATO would survive if the United States wasn't there. Obviously, it wouldn't be easy, but there was a tremendous speech yesterday by the Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski, and if anybody out there hasn't heard it yet, and you get a chance to, it's got to be on YouTube at this point. His name is Sikorski, Foreign Minister of Poland. He has talked about the fact that if anybody thinks that you're going to appease Vladimir Putin, you're simply mistaken and you're deluding yourself, and that Eastern Europe is going to pay a tremendous price for that. So I do believe that if we were to leave NATO, it would be temporarily, right, while Trump is there. I can certainly see pulling a vast number of troops back from around the world, basically, firing them. But the military is not supposed to be a jobs program because we don't need them for defense right now. I suppose you could shift a lot of troops from Germany over to Taiwan if you wanted to protect Taiwan from invasion. I'm not really sure that that's necessary. But what I get out of all of this is that, yes, Trump wants to be isolationist. That's his instinct, is America first means that we're isolated from the rest of the world, for better or worse, that we're not the world's caretaker anymore. I don't think that we can expect that the world will stay as it is, as we've come to appreciate it and enjoy it, without our leadership. But it is certainly possible that somebody else would step up and take the lead.
I guess the first question, and I was kind of looking at it, what might this look like for the future of NATO? I think NATO's here to stay, especially with the European Union and the other nations that are into it. It may even be, in some ways, a little bit better off without the United States and all the turmoil that we bring to this. When you think about it, this 4 years and the 4 years that Trump was in beforehand got back to normal. And I think they'll probably, as Scott said, they'll just hope that we come to our senses and that we can come back into NATO. It'd be kind of like Brexit. In my mind, it's a little bit. It kind of has a Brexit feeling to it. As for what it might mean for Ukraine, I don't think it's going to mean all that much, because I do believe that other countries are going to step up. They understand the importance of Ukraine, and I truly do think they're going to step up if we do not. I mean, they just came up with this pending deal, this framework of a deal where basically Ukraine is paying protection money to the United States. They're going to give over their mineral rights. I'm sorry, that's 1930s Al Capone kind of stuff. You pay me, and I'll make sure you're okay. That's just, again, you cannot see it in any other kind of light. Are we going to become isolated? We are already becoming isolated. Basically, the rest of the world is looking at us and they're saying, what in the hell is going on with those damn Americans? And you could see in a lot of things that are going on, and again, encouraging people to look at other news agencies and the way they talk about the United States. You can see places like France, Great Britain, Germany, Poland, the European Union as a whole, the Canadians, they're all moving on. And yes, I do agree. I think that the European Union, Canada, and other nations are going to say, all right, United States, you want to be that way? we're going to be this way. We're going to find economic and political partnerships somewhere else. And guess what? The Chinese are sitting there saying, "Hey, come talk to us." And if you want to see America topple down, just watch all these countries go to China, and China basically treat them right, as opposed to treating them like it's some protection racket. And yeah, I just, to me, that's where this is all heading. My hope is that it doesn't deteriorate so much between now and 2028 that we cannot regain, what we have to regain. That would be my greatest fear.
Since this question comes from London, and you mentioned Brexit, is there any possibility that the UK would rejoin the European Union? Has anybody gotten any sort of data points on that? It seems to me like it would be a really smart move to do that rather than to continue. Again, Brexit was mostly driven by fear of immigration. Immigration has been the biggest factor in the world over the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, 10 years. I'm not really sure how long. Certainly the immigration from Syria, might turn out to be temporary as Syrians return to Syria from where they are in Europe and other places, Turkey, for example. And so that the impulse that drove England into wanting Brexit might actually be over now, and that they could return to the EU, which I think would benefit a lot of people.
I've heard. I mean, I know Stammer was not the current Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. It was not a fan of Brexit. This was really more a conservative thing. The last thing I heard, I was actually listening. I always like to listen to Prime Minister's questions, and it was something that was brought up. It was a few months ago. It was brought up to him, and his feeling was as well. We'd have to have another referendum.
Yeah.
We'd have to see what the people think. The Scots would definitely be for it because they were against leaving the EU. The Welsh were surprisingly all for getting out of the EU. Seemed to have had a little bit of a different change of heart onto that. But I think Stammer's attitude is okay. We held a referendum. This was the vote, regardless of how close it was, regardless of the misinformation, disinformation was out there, how people did not understand. And if you listen to people on BBC when they talk about Brexit and the impact, it's almost all of them. I mean, and here is a cautionary tale for all those Trump voters. Every single one of those people in Great Britain who voted for Brexit said, "I didn't know what I was doing. It has impacted me greatly." And not in a good way, because I didn't think it through. That's basically what's happening here in the United States with Trump voters. They're beginning to see, wow, I didn't think this through. The hope would be Starmer and Labour could bring it back before the British people and see what happens. But the thing they have to remember is, for them to get back in, it would have to be a unanimous consent by all of the nations that are currently in the EU, and that may not be the easiest of dogs to sell here, because Great Britain was in the EU, but they still maintained the pound. They did not switch over to the euro, and that kind of upset some of those countries that were in. Hey, we're all in this together. Why do you get to do something different than what we get to do? We gave up the Deutschmark, we gave up the franc, we gave up the lira, we gave up all those currencies to have one solid currency. But the British, because you're so wonderful, you don't have to give up the British pound. So there may be some, even if they want to come back, there may be some obstacles for Great Britain to actually getting back into the EU. It'd be interesting. It'll be interesting to see if they do it. Hopefully they'll do it. If the Tories get back into power, it won't happen. Plain and simple.
It'd be interesting to see who joins the EU first. Britain coming back, or some of those other states like Ukraine or Moldova or the Balkans. Be interesting to see if the EU expands, if the UK basically helping Ukraine ends up having Ukraine join an agreement, the EU that they themselves had dropped out of, which is kind of an interesting dynamic.
I mean, it's very possible that, the question is about NATO. It is very possible without the United States in NATO that the EU, new NATO, and because Canada, even though it's in North America, is part of the British Commonwealth, as is Australia, it is possible that something comes out, maybe it'd be something different than what's called the EU, but that this becomes the new NATO. Because it's really pretty much everybody but the United States. Bring those Baltic states into the EU. Bring in Ukraine. Bring in all these. Let them be. It's hard to say, but it kind of almost looks like the Soviet Union, where all these different states got together and banded together, and that was the protection that they needed. So, if the United States is out of the equation, that might be an opportunity for the EU to step up and become the new replacement for NATO in at least name, because you're still going to have an awful lot of countries that were in NATO that are coming from the EU. So that might be an interesting possibility at the same time. And who knows, Canada, part of the British Commonwealth, Australia, part of the British Commonwealth, also might be allowed to be invited in. So we'll see.
So, Mark, what do you think of my idea about the peace dividend and bringing the troops home or firing the troops, basically?
Yeah, and you're right. The military was never meant as a jobs program, but an awful lot of people that join the military, and I give them all the credit for those that do, find that retiring from the military is a pretty good thing. I mean, there's some real security, putting in your 20 years and being able to retire. I think the idea of a peace dividend is a really good idea, all depending on what we're going to use it for. And you're right. I've been on trains in Europe, and it's a completely different than it is here. And also, the Frankfurt airport is a gorgeous airport, especially the new one is a gorgeous airport. The only real disappointing airport in that I've been in Europe was Heathrow. Heathrow looks like it did back in 1950, so whatever. But I'm sorry, the writer is from London, but I'm sorry, Heathrow is kind of little. It needs an update. My question is, and you're right, Scott. What are you going to do with all those people coming back, and what is the readiness going to look like for the United States military? And that really is a big deal. It's kind of like this idea of getting rid of the federal workers. I saw a map put up, and it showed in red states they have over 1 million federal workers. So if they get rid of all those federal workers, that's an awful lot of unemployed people you're going to be having in your state. And I think you're going to see that, and again, I don't know the breakdown. My question would be, what is the breakdown as far as military members and their breakdown red state, blue state? So if you're bringing them all back and basically laying them off, I think that's going to put an awful lot of pressure on the states. And if you've got a peace dividend, yes, I would love to see better railway service, but you're going to have to do something to create jobs for all those people you're bringing back, because at this point in time, and you're going to have to create jobs for all the people you bring back, not just the white guys, all of the people you bring back, the women, the minorities, all of those people need to have jobs. And then really the question comes down to it is what does that look like for our readiness? And is it worth it to have that peace dividend? I am a firm believer that we should probably not be the world's policeman in the same sense that we have been post-World War II. I think we get involved in far too many things that we should not get involved into, because we've proven, if nothing else, that we're really bad at that. Noriega was our fault. The Shah of Iran was our fault. There's been a whole bunch of people that we've put into place to make him into little Americas that it turned out that it was just a bad decision on our side. I would love to see us be able to bring some of these people home, use a lot more soft power like U.S. aid that we're getting rid of, and do a lot better when it comes to our foreign policy, and not take the idea of we're a military superpower, therefore we can insert ourselves into these things. We can still have a great voice in world politics because of our economic status. But now here's the thing. If we do isolate ourselves and these other countries do go find other economic partners and other political partners, even that avenue is going to be taken away from us. So we're moving in the wrong direction. If we want to make America great again, all you're going to do is just make America alone. And that's the scary part.
Yeah, I agree. And look, for somebody who's in London, this may appeal to you that Ukraine may not be able to win this war, but they could not lose it. They could actually hold on. Over the last few years, they've really made tremendous progress over there. I believe last year, or maybe even the 2 years, the GDP growth in Ukraine has been like 4.4%, which would be really good here. That would be a big win for us. Exports are up by 15% over the prior year, and they're now producing about 40% of the weapons they're using at home rather than getting hardly any weapons from themselves in 2022. So there's a good chance that even without the United States, that Ukraine will fight on, that NATO will be strengthened because Putin threatens the Baltics and Poland, at least Finland, maybe some of the other Scandinavian states, and that they continue to fight on until this comes to an end, which, as I've said before, only happens when Putin is dead or out of power. And that that the United States is no longer going to be the essential power that fuels Europe and the rest of the world. They can carry on without us. It's not easy, obviously, but I believe they will continue to fight on. There's not going to be an acquiescence, the kind that I think Trump and Putin are both hoping for.
No, I agree.
Speaking of Putin, as I understand it, Trump and Putin have come or are going to or thinking about or whatever it is, an arrangement where economic ties and whatever, so that America can be sold Russian oil. So if that happens, then of course we won't need Canadian oil, and that would be really extremely unfortunate to be supporting Russia financially, and obviously a huge departure from U.S. policy. So if that happens, I don't know. I mean, I think that people in the United States should start thinking about boycotting driving and think about carpooling or doing whatever can be done to not use Russian oil.
I hadn't seen that, Brooke. I don't know. I'm not sure where you're getting that from, but what would you possibly want with Russian oil?
Let me see if I can find that.
If that is true, that should worry Americans a lot, that we would become dependent upon the Russians for anything. That would be, I just can't see. I honestly can't see it. I can't see the American people being willing to go along with that. We've seen what it's like for us to be dependent upon China because we've abdicated some of our industry to them. To become for our oil, I just can't see why. There's no political or strategic advantage. Matter of fact, it's a huge disadvantage. So I would have to say that I haven't seen that either. But if that is something that is true, that would be disastrous. That would be absolutely disastrous.
Right. What I have seen is that Trump went to OPEC, went to bin Salman, and said you need to open the spigot and put more oil on the market and reduce the price of oil, which was what Obama did in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea, and Obama had gone to the King of Saudi Arabia and got them to, again, open the spigot and put more oil on the market, which wrecked Venezuela completely and also hurt Putin to the point where, Putin, not just in retaliation, but to preserve his country's economic wealth, wanted Trump to be president. And I shouldn't say wanted Trump. I should say anybody but Hillary Clinton. Because I think if Bernie Sanders had won the Democratic primary that year and it was Trump versus Bernie Sanders, Putin would have sat back and said, whatever happens, happens. I think the real person that Putin was afraid of was Hillary Clinton in 2016, because she had been the architect of so much of the independent Ukraine from Russia movement and so on, that she was really the one that he was scared of, not so much pro Trump, but pro anybody but Hillary. But that was my understanding, was that we would try to decimate Russia's economy by destroying the price per barrel that they're getting for their oil.
But that will be a topic for another time.
So, Brooke, I'm looking at this Reuters thing that you put in here.
Yeah.
Why am I not seeing anything about oil here? All I'm seeing is that Russia's economy is taking a huge hit over the last 3 years.
Oh, sorry.
And he's offering them a lifeline there.
Look at the Interfax, the second one. But Mark, to your point, what I don't understand is that the Republican Congress, and that they're not doing anything. I mean, doesn't anybody understand that this, if that these are, I mean, this is, as you said, this is Al Capone mobster stuff. This is these types of treatments of other people, that's just simply not going to be possible. I mean, no one from another country is going to tolerate that. I wouldn't.
Okay, so this Interfax thing, I mean, it's very, very short. Speaking of Canada, Trump said the United States does not need its oil or timber. That's about the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Yes, we do need their oil, and it'd be a lot cheaper than Russian oil because they're right on our border. I'd like to buy minerals on Russian land too, if we can, the rare earth and oil and gas. Told the press at the White House. So this is just, once again, Trump talking to hear himself talk. Once again, Trump said. So every time his lips are moving, he's lying, or he's just talking on his backside. So I don't put anything into this. Especially makes a stupid comment. We don't need your timber, nor do we need your oil. Okay.
Yeah, that's crazy. Actually, Canada's in a better position to sell their oil to China.
Yes.
Than we are. Yeah. We are to find a replacement for Canadian oil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We said that before on the podcast, and I did some more looking into that east-west pipeline across Saskatchewan, Alberta, and across to BC. And apparently, there's still resistance from the First Nations.
Oh yeah, sure.
Ahead. And the Canadians were not apparently wanting to explore the I forget what the name of the pipeline is, to go ahead and build that, and it's going to be expensive to build it. But I mean, the Canadians are going to have to, and I hope, because apparently the tariffs are going to come back on now, March 4th. It makes me livid. All this is so unnecessary. It just creates problems and chaos, and just to watch people jump around and scurry around and try to fix the problems and come kowtowing and try to appease, and then Trump gets to be the big boss and say no. And I wouldn't bother with him. I wouldn't bother trying to appease. I would find other partners, other economic partners, and turn my back. There's just no way I would bow, or I cannot understand these Republicans or anybody else.
Good luck with that.
I don't understand it.
I think the bigger point here is that, we used to actually stand for something, but now it's all transactional. And, that is, I suppose, a pity. But there's, Republicans have always been more motivated by finances than freedom, I think. And the ideas, the values that they hold are a lot more based on economics than the sort of idealistic, Wilsonian principles of, we're going to make the world a better place, lift all boats, et cetera, all that kind of talk. Trump is probably the anti-Wilson, if you think about him in the context of other presidents, and that, the way he looks at the world is through the lens of making money, and might makes right. And what is it Thucydides said? The powerful will do what they want, and the weak will suffer as they must. And that's the way he looks at the world.
Absolutely. So I think we did answer that question.
Oh, was there a question in there?
Yeah, there was a question.
It's like
somewhere.
45 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm sorry for meandering, and I believe we did answer Claudia from London from her. We did answer the question. So thank you both, and of course, thank you to all our listeners. And we will see you again next time on the Nova Society.
The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Apple iTunes, the largest source of podcasts and music on the internet, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your source for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. We'd also like to thank all of our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a question or a comment, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So for Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power in society is knowledge. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next time.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening!